evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Corporate Governance Committee. We have a full agenda, so we will try and get through it with some pace this evening. Just as a reminder to everyone, we are streaming this evening's meeting on the Council's YouTube channel. We will go to apologies first. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillors Shaw and Jennings and our independent member, Philip Webb.
Thank you very much. Following the meeting on the 29th of January, is everyone in agreement that I can sign the minutes of that meeting? Yeah. Thank you. Item 2, members' interest. Does anyone have any interest that they wish to declare this evening? No? Thank you. I will just very quickly point out we have swapped some agenda items around. So items 6 and 7 have now reversed. And that's purely because we've got what is now item 6 as an update, which then will be followed by the plan for 25-26. So we're going in date order rather than looking at what we're going to do and then what has already happened. So item 3, the External Auditor's Annual Report for 23-24. Suzanne will now introduce the item and then we will go to external audit colleagues who will take us through the reports.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the final report that we have received with regard to the annual accounts for 23-24 that Claire from EY took you through last meeting. The Council has done all of its aspects for the 23-24 and has published its accounts. Conscious is a final tidying up to do, but I'll leave that for Claire to explain where we are. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I don't propose to go through the report in detail as there isn't any new content in here. So this summarises our audit work from the 23-24 in terms of both the financial statements and our value for money work. So we just set out the work we performed against the significant risk areas and again highlight the significant weakness in value for money arrangements which we identified. The value for money commentary should be fairly familiar. So you had something in the audit completion report for 22-23, which came in November last year. We've just updated that for the positioners at the time of issuing that report for 23-24. So very happy to take any comments or questions, but this really just wraps up the 23-24 audit, subject to the issuing of the final certificate, and we can't do that until the National Audit Office have confirmed to us that they have completed their audit of the whole of government accounts. So we're not a sampled component, you know, the authority is well below the threshold, but we can't formally sign our opinion until they've signed off theirs.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Councillor Gray?
Yeah, well, I do actually. So I'm sort of slightly at a loss where to sort of begin here because it's not a happy story that we've got here. So what I would quite like to understand, because I've not read anything like this in the 22 years that I've been here, where you are basically not signing off our accounts this evening. You can't give us assurance around going concern. We're obviously waiting for the National Audit Office to come back to us to see whether or not there's anything else that they want. And I think really from a sort of corporate governance point of view, what I'm trying to, as I read through all of this, what I'm trying to get to the bottom of is how much of this is because you don't have enough resource to be able to look at what we've done, and how much of the comments, particularly around value for money, are comments that you're making with enough resource, but saying that we don't have adequate arrangements in place. It strikes me that there seems to be issues on both sides of the table, and I can't work out myself, Chair, where the dividing line between them is. So a little bit more clarity, and then I've probably got a couple more questions.
Yeah. So if you'd like me to start, in terms of the disclaimed opinion, so I think what is really important to point out here is that we did try to do the full audit. Management were fully cooperative in terms of the financial statements audit, and actually, if you recall, the audit results report we presented at the last committee that had an appendix dashboard in the back, and that was that despite the fact you've got a disclaimed opinion, that did set out where we'd got the assurance, where the committee could take assurance of the accounts. And actually here at Huntingdon District Council, that was pretty much the full balance sheet. There were elements where we did not have the resource to complete the review. The detailed work had been done. There were no issues there. There were some elements where we didn't have the resource to finish the detailed review, but we prioritised the review in terms of those areas that would not impact the build back of the assurance on the accounts. Because we were given a disclaimed opinion in the format of that opinion, actually we don't give an opinion on going concern in that area, so kind of we didn't need to do the work because we're not given an opinion on that for the 23-24 audit. As the process for the rebuild of assurance goes on and the disclaimer of the opinion falls away, then we will come back to report and how we would do in our normal cycle on all of those areas of the financial statements.
Okay. So perhaps a question for Suzanne here. Did you see this report before it came to us?
Yes, we've seen the report and we saw the audit results report, and the disclaimed opinion is not unique to us. It is one that is prominent in the across the local government sector because of the backlog and the backstop dates to catch up. So yes, I did, and it's something, unfortunately, that none of us in the sector, both external audit and local authority directors of finance, are necessarily content with. However, we are where we are. The directive is to put in place the backstop dates, to operate in this way and to look to the future. So I think it's something we have to accept. I'm not saying I agree, but we have to accept this is where we are and we have to look to the future. So yes is the answer to your question. Hopefully that's given you some explanation from my perspective.
Okay. So, I mean, when I look through the report, I mean, on pages 20, 21 and 22, I can see three separate factual errors about how we do business here at the council. So overview and scrutiny don't review the risk register. On page 20, we do. Our budget doesn't go out to public consultation. On page 21. On page 22, we don't submit papers 10 working days in advance for everyone to look at. I mean, these are fairly fundamental. You know, this is just how our constitution operates here. And I think there are probably more, but they're the three that sort of leapt out to me on the way through here. So just reading this, I'm wondering who's sort of double checked it, really, from my perspective. Leaving that to one side, I want to return to the value for money issues, because when you look inside here, we have identified, top of page 7, a significant weakness in the value for money arrangements for governance, and we've included a whole section about that. And as a committee, I think we've got to reflect on that, because that's not got anything to do with the fact that there's not much resource in the accounting sector. That's a reflection on us. So I can understand we want to put everything behind us and we want to move forward, but I don't recall this council ever having been given that before. And I think we've got to reflect on that, Chair, as a committee. So I understand you want to get through the agenda tonight and it's all a bit inconvenient, but I do think that we do need to reflect on it.
Can I just clarify? It's not that I want to get through it. We have to get through it. So it's not that it's inconvenient. Do we have any further comments or questions?
Thank you, Chairman. You said we have to get through this tonight, but my understanding was we should have got through this a month ago. And I don't understand why we didn't have an additional audit corporate governance meeting to deal with the accounts within the timeline, because other authorities had to put in extra committee meetings to deal with clearing the backlog within the government's the timeline that was agreed for resolving the backlog, and and other councils have had reports that don't have so many disclaimers in them. And I'm very disappointed that we have so many disclaimers. I thought our accounts were being managed well, and yet clearly EY don't feel up to. Now, whether that's because the EY team dealing with Huntingdonshire's accounts has not been resourced as well as the teams dealing with other authorities, or whether there are deficiencies in the way that the information was provided to them. We're sitting here on the 25th of March, and yet the backlog was supposed to have been cleared by the 28th of February 2025, the backstop date. And that's the first paragraph on page 6 of the report. The Accounts and Audit Amendment Regulations 2024 said that the year statements for the year ended 31st March 2024 were to be approved not later than 28th of February. And here we are on the 25th of March, a month, 4 weeks, three and a half weeks after the 28th of February, and we don't actually have an audited accounts to be approved. We have a disclaimed set of accounts approved, and I find that's totally unsatisfactory.
Claire, did you want to come back in?
Yes, so just to be clear, we did report on the financial statements in January. The January Corporate Governance Committee was the committee for the approval of the financial statements. We did sign the financial statements in advance of the backstop date, so the accounts were approved and they were signed in February 2025. This report summarises the results of our work. We actually have 3 months from the date of the opinion to produce this auditor's annual report. So this is well within the time frame issued by the National Audit Office to issue the annual report. And I think in terms of an audited set of accounts, it is, I accept that, as we've talked about, we're in a really unusual position, and the term disclaimer of opinion does sound really harsh, but we did do an awful lot of audit work on those accounts, which we reported back in January. What we're seeing here on page 6, the delays where we didn't have the resource available. So these are the areas where we didn't have the resource available to close down those final review comments. But actually that doesn't impact the form of opinion necessarily that we gave because of the backstop date this year. And in terms of being able to close down, again, the certificate, that doesn't impact the backstop date. The backstop date was purely about the audit opinion on the financial statements. Often, for reasons not related to the backstop, the certificate would come later because there'd be certain responsibilities that we'd need to do around whole of government accounts, or if we had an objection or something like that, the certificate would often be commonly held open. So I think in terms of governance, everything has worked here as we would have expected it to do in advance of the backstop.
Did you want to come back at all?
No, that's all right.
Any other questions or comments before we look at the recommendation? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah, I was quite shocked at reading this as well, and things that we've gone through. But on page 29, the significant weaknesses that were identified, and there's one particular part of it which says, let me find it again. It says the absence of an effective internal audit function, including independent head of internal audit, undermines the ability of the council to evaluate its own effectiveness. Has that been rectified now in any way?
Yeah, so in our main report, we did actually reflect on the fact that management have taken action as to the appointment RSM. And so as we work through 24-25, we will reflect some of that in our report, and in terms of the changes that have been updated. The nature of this report is it's very time bound to what the impact was in 23-24.
So why was that weakness there in the first place? That's what I'm really concerned, and I know we've rectified that, but why was it there in the first place?
I can only reflect what I've seen since I arrived in October last year. I wasn't here in 23, 24. I know some of the history. I know that there were issues historically then, and that's part of this issue. We are looking at a year that's 23, 24. I can't turn the clock back and change that, but what I have hopefully demonstrated to this committee, and I think to the external auditors, is that management have now realised very quick, there are some things to put in place. We cannot turn the clock back and change for 23, 24. I can only, as I've demonstrated hopefully to you in the previous two meetings that I've attended, that we have got a grip and that we will put in place what needs to be done, and you'll hear more about that shortly in terms of what corporate leadership team have worked with RSM on in terms of an audit programme for the following year and what has been done over the last quarter of this year. So I can only give you my assurance about the future. I can't account for a time when I wasn't here, nor were a number of the corporate leadership team. However, what I hope we are starting to demonstrate to you is that we do intend for it to be different going forward.
Okay, so as part of this item, the committee is recommended to comment and note the auditor's annual report set out at Appendix 1. Is everybody happy that we note that?
I'm obviously unhappy, Chair, that there are inaccuracies in the report. So I don't know what we want to do about that.
Yeah, so they've been noted and that will be picked up.
Oh, right, okay.
With working with Claire, we will make sure that those factual inaccuracies are corrected in this report. So apologies that we didn't pick them up in advance.
So with that being said, is everyone happy that we note the report that's set out?
We note the report.
We
I wouldn't
do.
describe ourselves as being happy.
No.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. Okay, moving on. Item 4 on the agenda. This is a verbal update from Claire from Ernst & Young, who will outline this for us.
So no sooner have we completed 23-24, we are moving on to 24-25 to really get back. This is the whole intention of the government and the reset and recovery of local audit, is that we get back on track for doing audits in the usual time cycle. So I'm very pleased to say that our scope and our strategy work for 24-25 is ongoing at the minute. We've got time booked in with management to start doing our detailed walkthroughs and procedures. We have given some thought to what our risk assessment will look like. So when the audit plan is developed, we think the risks will be largely the same as they were in 23-24. There is a new accounting standard being adopted for 24-25 in respect of leases. So we'll have an additional risk and we'll be doing some additional work around the adoption of that accounting standard in 24-25. But in terms of the approach to the audit, the risks should be fairly similar. We have obviously the element of the rebuild of assurance from the disclaim periods. We are still awaiting guidance from the national audit and the FRC in terms of more granular detail about what that might look like. Hopefully by the time I get to the next committee in June, I might be able to share a bit more. We should have something through to share with the committee. Our intention is that we'll get the full audit planning report drafted and shared with management by the end of April to give them time to review and comment, and it will come to the next committee in June for formal approval by the Corporate Governance Committee before commencing our audit work in around July time, due to sign off between some point in the final quarter of this calendar year is what we're working towards.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to open this up to the floor. Did you want to come in first? No. Yeah, of course.
Given that we don't formally meet until June, once we've been through the plan for April, my suggestion to the committee is that we circulate it to the committee well in advance of the June meeting, and then obviously if it's iterated because of the timing of meetings. So I'm happy to make that proposal to the committee if it's your desire.
Yep, I'm seeing nods, so yes, please. Any comments or questions on what you've just heard from Claire in terms of nodding? Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for reading our minds, Suzanne, because obviously I was kind of expecting to see something written on paper, and understand why now that you've explained that. So yeah, from that point of view, that would be good to get there. Just a question for Claire, really. I mean, do you ever think we're going to get back to a world where, the September committee of the meeting is going to be the meeting at which we sort of sign this all off and, we're going to be done and dusted?
I am an optimist, but as a firm, we have been very clear that we are phasing our signing this year from September to December. We've already talked about getting our own project plan, which we're going to share with management. So our intention would be very much this year that we would get, to a point in signing at the committee some point after September, definitely before Christmas. I haven't checked the time of the committees, that's why I'm being slightly vague, just to see when the committee timelines are. But that's absolutely what we're aiming for. I think when the plan comes, what will be important to talk to the committee, given the discussion around disclaimer, about what is that form of opinion going to look like in 24, 25, because the impact of the backstop and disclaimed opinions does take a few years to roll out. So it won't be a completely clean audit opinion again, but you should start to see kind of some areas now being completely assured. And as we work through that and we get the guidance, I can perhaps talk the committee through that at one of the next committees and, what will the form of opinion look like and how does that correlate to the actual audit work that we're doing?
Any other comments before we move on? Nope. Okay. So we'll move to item 5, the corporate risk register. Suzanne will now present this item.
Thank you, Chair. So following last meeting where I demonstrated the roadmap for where we were moving forward with corporate risk and the 18 themes, what this report now sets out for you is the work that we've done to identify the risk owner, which is at CLT level. Clearly, for some of those risks, and I'll start with Corporate 001 Cyber, whilst I own it in my capacity as Senior Information Responsible Officer, some of the mitigating actions are owned by the Chief Digital Information Officer. So we're starting to do that level of work. So on page 45, that sets out the risk, the bit of the shortened version of the description, because clearly the system contains an awful lot more detail, which member of corporate leadership team owns them, the inherent priority, meaning the inherent rank if we did nothing about them, that's what they're assessed at, and then the residual priority, taking account of things that management have identified as areas that potentially mitigate those risks. On page 46 is the heat risk map, and in the box, I didn't get my words quite right. The colour of the dot actually indicates the level of the risk score. The number within it is the reference to the risk itself. So apologies, that's not quite clear. And you will see from that heat map that we don't have any risk currently sitting in green, because inherently one would think if they were, then why were they a corporate risk? So despite the fact that a number of them started off without any mitigation in our assessment as red risks, we believe that there is sufficient mitigation in place to put them into the different colours of amber and paler yellow, but that still requires working through and further testing. On page 47, the same risks show you where they started, where we think they sit currently as residual risks, and also some ambition to actually try and mitigate them further. I think we all recognise with corporate risks it would be either impossible or incredibly expensive to get every single one to green, and perhaps not one has to accept that sometimes there are some inherent risks that you can't absolutely mitigate away. So this is the first presentation to you in its new format of the corporate risk register. So further work's being done by each of the risk owners now to look at each of the controls in place, so then some assurance can be done on each of those controls. Following on from that, then the next step in the roadmap was to take this down to the next level with each of the heads of service, and there is a plan in place to do that over the next couple of months or so. So happy to take any comments, observations, questions.
Councillor Hodgson-Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little bit intrigued. The numbers on the chart in the
Which
little round
page?
circles. So that's
Oh, on the-
page 46. These refer to the numbers on page 47, not numbers on page 45. Is that correct?
They're actually the same numbers, Councillor Hodgson-Jones. So
Well-
where the prefix is COP 001, and I think they're listed in, the matrix ID of 1 to 0 refers to page 47. So
Yes.
apologies. Yes, that you're correct in that
All
assumption.
right, I was thrown at first. I'm a little bit intrigued as to how something can move from a red risk to a yellow risk purely in terms of probability on the financial risk. Are we saying that financial risks were truly significant and they were high, but all of a sudden they've now become improbable? What has changed that enables a financial risk to go from being red and to go to being yellow as a medium risk, I think, so from very high to medium, purely by virtue of it being reduced to improbability? I don't understand how a red risk can be improbable.
When I was reviewing the controls on that particular one and the way the risk was framed, it may be that the risk, we need to revisit the framing of the risk. I think from memory, I haven't got the system up in front of me, the nature of that was around not at the point when I was initially setting it up. Obviously, we hadn't done budgeting for that year, didn't know what the settlement was, but now that the settlement is there, it's an improbable risk for this council because actually we do have reserves. We are in a financially strong position. Happy to take that away and have a further look at my assessment, and that's part of why I bring it here for you to challenge corporate leadership team on that. So I'm happy to take that away and reconsider the probability rating.
Sorry, can I just follow up? Have your probabilities been adjusted to take into account local government reorganisation? Because that is clearly going to have an impact on financial risk. It will also have an impact on the auditors. They will finally get us to a clean audit in about 3 or 4 years' time, and then have to start from scratch again as all the organisations are shaken up. Pardon? That's why they're doing it. Hope not.
Thank you for that observation. Yes, indeed, clearly this is a dynamic piece of work. We present you with a snapshot at that particular point in time. We do also have a risk local government reorganisation itself, and I think as each day unfurls, we see more and more information that allows us to reassess those risks. So clearly some of those have a interrelationship with local government review. Some of them don't necessarily. So governance should be strong, whatever, shouldn't it? So data protection, there are risks around that and probabilities around that irrespective of local government review. But clearly that will need to form part of the thinking. So yes, we have considered local government review, but it will change on a regular basis. So it will be looked at dynamically.
If I may, Chairman. Oh, sorry, Suzanne, you just walked into a trap. Local government review is classified here as likely. I think it ought to be in the 5th column, and that's not a political statement.
I think that's a reasonable observation. So I think it is almost certain now. I think clearly, unless something changes again in the timelines, but as we sit today, I think that's not an unreasonable observation. So clearly what I think I'm trying to demonstrate to you is, we've had an initial work at this. It will change. And actually we welcome the fact that in bringing it here, you make some observations that when we're looking at it in the detail and trying to, assess all of those in that round. So thank you for that. I will take that one back because I think your observation is very pertinent.
Councillor Taylor.
I like this. It's quite clear, quite easy to see, easy to read. So thank you. That's all I need to say.
Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree, Councillor Taylor. This is an excellent report, and it's perhaps worth reflecting how we're actually almost non-existent. The reflection of risk has been over certainly the period of time that I've been on the Corporate Governance Committee, and I would just suggest that both this and indeed the audit aspects of the work that RSM are doing are better, frankly, than anything we've seen in the last 4 years. So I don't think quite agree with Councillor Gray on his suggestion that things were better or fine and dandy 3 years ago. Just moving on to a couple of questions then. Will the reports going forward, will we see reflection of risk tolerance and risk appetite reflected in these? And the other question is, how would you show if the level of risk the inherent risk is deemed to have changed from one meeting to the next? Thank you.
2 points on that. I recognise that we're still on a journey, and what we need to then start looking at is both the risk strategy, risk appetite, and again, I think we would benefit from refreshing those policies and those statements. So that is on the to-do list. As regards how they will demonstrate that, my intention would be that if a risk score has changed, I'd articulate that in this paper for you. So, for example, it's absolutely certain, not almost certain, that one of them is going to change because of the comments and observations earlier. Therefore, I would detail that for you. So if something hadn't moved, I would look not to say anything about it, but if something had moved because of something different had transpired. So we'll bring back the corporate risk register to each of the meetings, which I think is your requirement of this committee. And then moving forward, once we've iterated that a bit further and done some further work with heads of service, we can look at, with the committee, at the committee's behest, whether or not you want to do something more deep in terms of a theme or in terms of a particular service area or directorate, and then other colleagues can come along and talk about the risks that they're managing in their area, which was all part of that roadmap that we presented last time. So that would be my intention and plan.
Councillor Gray.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Wells, for bringing up the movement between one meeting and the other, because even though he is many thousands of miles away on the other side of the world, I know that if Councillor Jennings was here, he would have said exactly that point. And Suzanne, I know we're on a journey, but this is a journey that we've been on for many, many meetings, and we don't seem to have cracked it. So we're trusting in you to deliver for the June meeting, that we can see where we were and where it's moved to. On one other point, as I look down all of these, and this is not I'm not trying to make a sort of some kind of particular point here. I'm just asking the question around risk number 11, which is the environmental risk, the failure to effectively respond to the climate change agenda in the required timeframe. All of the other risks that sit on there are things that we can actively influence, that affect us as a council, and that we can do something about. And I wonder whether that one there actually doesn't really fall into that category, because in many ways we're saying it's possible that there's, on the risk register, we're saying it's possible that there's going to be climate change. I think there are plenty of people who would say, well, it's actually happening, so that's very likely. But I think the question is that whether we do or whether we don't do the things that Councillor Davenport-Ray, for example, might be encouraging us to do here, does that ultimately pose an existential risk to the council, whether we do them or whether we don't do them? Because I think the issue there is of a much greater magnitude, whereas everything else that sits there is things that are very much within our control. And it just sticks out to me as being one that I understand why it's there, but I'm not certain that we can answer that question. And even if we threw all the resources that we had into trying to attack it, we might still fail. So I think it sort of stands out for me as being an unusual risk that we've got sitting there. I understand that there's the political reason why we would have it there, to keep it front of mind and keep it as a focus for the authority. But I think our ability to actually genuinely say that we can manage that risk is probably stretching reality.
happy to take that back to my colleagues at corporate leadership team. It may be, again, the framing around it, that rather than actually being able to stop climate change, it's about the actions that the council can do for itself around the things it has got control over, you know, doing things to our own buildings or things like that. So it may be that the one-line description there could be better framed. So I'll take that back and we'll have a further review of that, because I can understand what you're saying there.
Any other comments or questions? Nope. Okay, well, we will move on from that. So we're going to jump forward to what is in your agenda pack as item 7, but we've moved it to become item 6, which is the internal audit update report. And Dan from RSM will now present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So if I may just take you to page 81 in the papers, so the key messages section. So since the last meeting, we have finalised those 4 reports shown in the first section there. 2 further final reports. I haven't incorporated this into the paper, but 2 final reports have also been issued in relation to the 23-24 plan that were actually still open. They were undertaken by an external party. They were sort of specialist IT assurance reviews. They both came through with positive opinions, so both with reasonable assurance. But I did agree with Suzanne that I would just sort of mention that this evening as well. We've also issued a further report in draft, the commercial estates rent review. Page 83 and 84 then goes on to summarise those 4 reviews that have been finalised since the last meeting. Clearly, there are a number of sort of high and medium priority actions that have been agreed through those reviews. So I'll take the items as read in terms of, but happy to take any questions. Those 4 reviews were undertaken by the in-house team. What we've undertaken is to get those to a finalised status. So they've all got action owners against all the actions, and they've all got implementation dates. And they will then go on to the sort of the tracker, the management action tracker that officers keep. But no, it's not lost on me that obviously we will need to revisit those actions in the 25-26 programme in terms of coming back to this committee and giving you some independent assurance that those actions have indeed been implemented. Appendix A, hopefully, what we will hopefully get into is in the 25-6 programme of work is just a less sort of muddled table. You'll recall from the last meeting, there's obviously been a number of deferrals from the current year's programme or quite a bit of movement on there, but I've sort of kept that table consistent with the last meeting. So that shows you all the reports that have been issued in final from the 24-25 programme year to date. That includes obviously those 4 reviews that are on the agenda this evening. Top of page 88, just to note there have been 2 changes to the existing 24-5 programme. I put sort of a reason for the change there on those 2 reviews, but both of those reviews, the home and hybrid working and the committee governance structure reviews, both of those are in progress. The remainder of page 88 and 89, I wasn't going to talk to those. That has not moved on. I reported that to your last meeting, so I've just left that commentary in the report. What we have also got just at the tail end of the report are 3 further client briefings. If you'll indulge me, Chair, I will just touch upon those. So the failure to prevent fraud briefing, we have had some communication with the council's in-house fraud team. So we are liaising with that team to provide some sort of guidance and advice on updates in relation to sort of council policies and procedures in that area, and ensuring that it sort of brings in all of the good practice from the failure to prevent fraud legislation that's coming through in the briefing we've got there. I think what's particularly important for the committee to note is the briefing we've got there on the global internal audit standards. So you picked up earlier on in the agenda that there was a significant governance weakness in EY's paper in relation to the internal audit provision. So what that paper is doing is demonstrating what RSM have done as a firm in terms of a gap analysis against our existing arrangements to comply with the public sector internal audit standards and indeed the new global standards. And we've in effect undertaken a gap analysis and made some minor enhancements to things like report formats, our working papers, sort of electronic working papers, that kind of thing. And that's really just demonstrating that we believe we are fully compliant based on those amendments we've made. And obviously that is pertinent to the committee to note, because the next paper on your agenda is about approving a plan of work for 25-26. And clearly you will want an internal audit service that complies with those standards. The emerging risk radar briefing, I think that the purpose of that in the main, I mean, obviously it's for the committee's information, but that can be used by officers in terms of, it's not sort of specific to local government. It's obviously we've gone out and sort of spoken to 130 business leaders and just said what are some of the emerging risks they are seeing across business. And I think that the purpose of that is for officers to then take that and just consider that in terms of your own corporate risk register. Indeed, we look at something like the events at Heathrow and start to think, well, business continuity arrangements is something like business continuity, for example, incorporated, or are you satisfied that a risk, whether it be operational or strategic, is there and controls are in place? So I'll perhaps pause there, Chair, and happy to take any questions on that progress report paper.
Yep. So again, I will open this up. Councillor Hodgson-Jones, did you want to come in?
Thank you. Page 5 of your report, which is page 83 of our pack. I note that we've got 4 final reports, 3 of which give us limited assurance and 1 gives us reasonable assurance. So I thought I'd look at what was different about the reasonable assurance, which is the green bin implementation. And then I was a little bit horrified to discover that the comments in there, the main issues identified, no process notes to cover the green bin subscription fee process. That to me says that we don't actually have a clear control system to work out what fees have been issued and how they've been collected and how they're reconciled. There are no identified risks recorded on the risk register. That is not the same, in my mind, as there are no risks. They just haven't been identified and recorded. Next one is even more troubling. Management were unable to locate all the contracts in the contracts register. I mean, how do you lose contracts? And what is going on here? And the operations team are unaware of the backup plan should there be a break in the technology. And then that leaves me thinking, well, how have we got a reasonable assurance with this set of comments? Sorry.
I think all I can offer at this stage is what we'd agreed and what I reported back to the last committee was that we would get the existing reports that have been undertaken by the in-house team finalised with action owners and implementation dates. I think, to be fair, there had been some sort of gaps identified through the analysis that another, I think BDO had undertaken in terms of sort of compliance with some of the arrangements with the sort of old in-house team against the public sector internal audit standards. So, sorry, it's not a sort of a direct answer to be able to say how was that opinion arrived at, what we agreed we would do. I think the important thing here, I absolutely note your observations. I think the really important thing here is to recognise that a series of actions have been agreed. They have got action owners. They have got implementation dates, and I think it's incumbent upon us to ensure that through a follow-up audit that those actions are indeed implemented and the risk mitigated. But I note the comments around the assurance opinion provided.
I think Suzanne can add a bit more to that.
If I might say, particularly on that particular one that you've singled out there, obviously I've taken responsibility on behalf of CLT for, following up the audit actions and making sure they're coming to CLT, and some of that's reflected. We're going to come to that in item 8 in a moment. But with that one in particular, I can assure you that those things have now been put in place, because actually when I was doing the checks for when those actions were due to take place, clearly they'll then be subject to follow-up action, but definitely all the risks are on the risk register for this particular activity, and all the contracts have been properly located with the two you particularly called out. As regards the process, I can't remember whether the process note, I haven't seen that myself, but I will pick that back up. And but there was a lot of action has been taken on that the actions in that particular audit.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think what you're saying actually raises a quite separate issue, and again from what Daniel was saying, is that actions have been discussed between the internal audit team and the process managers involved. We're not seeing on this report what those actions are, nor are we seeing the dates by which they're due to be completed. Now, I'm not asking for a full list of all the action points, but how will we know that the actions that have been agreed are actually implemented? And that presumably will be a separate report, but I've never actually seen such a report come to this committee of progress against actions agreed from internal audit reports.
If I might, Councillor Hodgson-Jones, when we get to item 8, you might see that that's what I'm trying to start to do for you, to show you the actions against each of the audits, what they rank at, when they're due to be done, and if any are being redated, they'll be written in the report. So perhaps that report will give you some comfort that that's why I'm trying to demonstrate to the committee that actually we are having you hold us to account in terms of the audit actions, and that corporate leadership team, and Dan does come along to that and observe that conversation, are actually seeing that in that level of detail. So I'll hopefully come back to that at that item.
Yeah.
Just to say, yeah, I'm aware that that's what you've been planning to do and that's what you're trying to do, but I'm reiterating the point that it's strange that this committee has not had that in the past. And that's a process failure from internal audit from previous years, previous quarters, and I think we need to keep an eye on that.
I think the key word there is, or key words, is in the past, and I think we can't change that. But I love the fact that we're going to be able to move forward as it's set out in item 8. So having had a brief discussion about that earlier, I think that's going to be a really positive step going forward. Do we have any other comments or questions? Did you want to?
Yeah, going back to what Councillor Hodgson-Jones just said, it just seems to be over the last few years, that's a constant theme in this committee. We keep asking for those updates and what has been closed, etc. And I can see that it's, we've got new members of the team, and so every time we get a reassurance that yes, it's going to happen, it's going to come through. So please, yes.
I think you can be reassured. It's set out in the papers. It's already, the information is already there.
Thank you.
And we've had a discussion about that earlier today.
Yeah.
So, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, can I start by saying this is very welcome progress. So thank you, Daniel, and your team. Really appreciate that. I don't think we should underestimate the gravity of having 3 out of the 4 hitting limited assurance, because I think if I hit limited assurance at work, I would be in hot water. So this is not a good place for us to find ourselves, but it is where we find ourselves. To that point, action owners are identified. They may well be, but not to us. So it would be really helpful if the report had somebody. I mean, I know, Suzanne, ultimately you're the sort of the representative of the team here, but there must be officers that are sort of specifically responsible for overseeing these. And I think it would be helpful if the report highlighted that. I mean, I did hear Councillor Wells sort of saying to me earlier that not to pretend that everything was all sort of rosy in the past. You know, I can't remember a value for money issue being raised in the past. And I think what this does highlight, and I accept, Chair, your point about this is in the past and we're looking to the future, is that things have the wheels have come off in certain corners of the organisation here, and they need to get back on and fast. And I know you know that, Suzanne, and I know Michelle is signed up to that. But it does underline that. The Code of Procurement, not at all surprised that that's got limited assurance coming out of there. I know, Sharon, we've been battling for years over bad debts and things like that. But again, getting the systems to actually deal with it and pulling that through, I know is tricky. I was very concerned about the One Leisure ones, Chair, if I'm honest, because that really is, that's outward facing. I mean, if we lose a bit of money, it's a bit inconvenient, but if we do something wrong at our leisure centres, it could be very distressing. And the idea that the business compliance and support manager is currently on secondment and there are no plans to fill this role seemed to me to underline again needing some actions. Anyway, the point has been made by Councillor Taylor, which I fully support in terms of fine. So Daniel, we'd really like to see next time round, what has happened in the intervening 3 months on these. Congratulations again for getting it done. My final point is really a question, Chair, which is on page 10 of the report. I don't know what number that is in the pack. We have Appendix B, Other Matters. And there we're sort of outlining changes to the internal audit plan. Are we approving those in the next item that we're kind of going back to? Because there's some reasonable amount of churn going on here in terms of things that have dropped off, things that have come on, slight shifts in emphasis from where you were before. Is this sort of de facto approving that we think that we're signing up to all of this?
Yeah, did you want to come in, Dan?
So the only changes that have happened since the last meeting, so the sort of the second table on that page 10, that's what I reported to the last meeting to try and say, look, this is where we found ourselves when we tried to understand the current position back in January of the 24/5 plan. So, for example, a number of audits had been deferred, a number of audits hadn't been commissioned from external specialists and so on. So the second table is more a repeat of what had previously been reported, just so that the committee can see that. The only 2 changes to the current year's plan from the last meeting are that the Home and Hybrid Working Advisory Review and Corporate Governance Structure Reviews have replaced 2 other reviews that were due to take place, but both the CEO and Section 151 felt that these reviews were more appropriate and would add more value.
Yeah, of course. So thank you for that clarification. So I suppose this is directly to Suzanne then. I mean, development management, those of us who are councillors have been slayed by our constituents over development management for the last 3 or 4 years, really, in terms of its performance, in terms of its delivery and all the rest of it. So I was getting quite excited that we were going to be going to do an audit on it, but it looks like you're telling me to quell my excitement here. Could you just explain the rationale?
I think your excitement will soon be met, Councillor Gray, because in fact the reason we didn't ask audit, or we suggested, or the Director of Place suggested, was because we just had the Corporate Peer Challenge on planning, the specific one, and that report will be coming to, I can't remember which body it's coming to, so that was the reason why that had just been conducted. It hasn't been shared with councillors yet, but you'll get that in the not too distant future. I will check with Mike Gildersleeves when that's due. And so having just had the corporate peer team in, that was the decision taken, that actually to do an audit on top of that did not seem a good use, proportionate and fair on the team as well. So you'll see the results from the corporate peer challenge on planning in the not too distant future. I can't remember the timeline for that. Apologies.
Okay, so with this, sorry. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to refer to the recommendation, which is for us to note what we have received. Is everyone in agreement that we note that and we can move on? Yep. Notice I didn't say the word happy. But is everyone in agreement? Yeah, okay. So we're going to jump to the draft internal audit plan for 25-26 and the internal audit charter. Suzanne, I'll hand over to you first and then on to Dan, who will talk us through the detail that's in the report.
Thank you, Chair. All I wanted to really introduce is to say that we've gone through a process with RSM following the line that we described at the last meeting, and it's been iterative with corporate leadership team in terms of items that were suggested by ourselves, items were picked up from yourself that you suggested to RSM, and very much suggested picking up the comments that were made earlier. We, as a leadership team, believe that the plan is based on the intention to give sufficient coverage in order that a full opinion can be given at the end of this coming financial year in terms of a head of internal audit plan. But as to regard some of the logic, rationale, etc., that's really in Dan's hands as the person who is leading for us on it. So I'll hand over if that's acceptable, Chair.
Dan, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Suzanne. So obviously what the document tries to sort of talk about, I just wanted to bring it to life a little bit because obviously the first time that we've brought this in front of the committee. So we've met with the corporate leadership team. We've also got a session planned with heads of service in terms of running through what an internal audit looks like, what that should look like under sort of the new regime, if you like, to sort of bring that to life a little bit with them. We've also considered, obviously, previous coverage. We've considered some of the commentary in the LGA peer review. We've obviously looked at the latest sort of recently refreshed risk register. We've spoken to the in-house team. We've also referenced our own sort of guidance that we've got both for public sector clients and for local government in particular, and that Risk Radar publication as well. So we've considered all of that sort of information, and alongside that, obviously, we've also factored in where the CLT is saying there are other sources of assurance. So Suzanne's just mentioned that example there around sort of development management. So clearly we don't want to duplicate assurances that are coming through elsewhere. So that's sort of the methodology that's been followed, and that's culminated in, if I were to take you to section sort of 2.1 first. So what that section is obviously there's a backward look there in terms of what of the last 3 financial years looked at. So we've incorporated the opinion in there, so whether that's adequate or limited. We've then got obviously a tick in all of the areas that we're proposing is in the 25-6 programme, but then we've also got another couple of years of forward look. So if something doesn't sit in this year, the committee can get a feel for when we are proposing to look at it in terms of future financial years. at Appendix 3, Section 3, there's the Internal Audit Charter. So that is a requirement of the Internal Audit Standards to have a charter in place. That broadly just talks about roles and responsibilities for internal audit, for the committee, for management. But that's sort of fairly tried and tested. Happy to take any questions on there if there are any, but it, as I say, it sort of pulls out roles and responsibilities. But section 1.1 is obviously what you're interested in terms of the proposed areas for coverage in the 25-6 plan. I've articulated on the document as well whether that is an audit that sort of RSM will be undertaking or one that the in-house team will be undertaking, that we will be scoping and quality assuring and overseeing. A number of those, so I think it's 12 of those audits are linked to / driven by the risk register that you've just seen this evening. We've got a further 9 core audits in the next section, and we've also got some sort of other coverage. So there's usually grant audits that are required in year. We've got follow-up coverage, so that is where we are looking at previously agreed management actions, those that we've just referenced in the previous paper. We will, if management are self-assessing that that has been fully implemented, we will then come in and say, okay, let's see the evidence of that, let's prove it. So that's what sort of a follow-up review means. We've also got an element of budget in there in terms of just some advice and assistance that the executive may need throughout the year. So I think the other important point to note, and the point that I'll finish on, is this is very much to be kept under review during the year. So we will meet with statutory officers. We will also take this through CLT, and we will obviously take into account any comments that the committee have throughout the year in terms of risks that are materialising, or if there's a known other source of assurance that comes through that wasn't known at the time that we sort of planned this. This plan should very much be kept under review, be flexible, and be amended in year if required.
Thank you, Dan. Again, I'm going to open this up for any comments or questions. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dan. You talked about when you read the plan itself, it refers to sorry, lost me. Either RSM or the in-house team, which sounds a little bit as if they're working separately from you. But I think you touched on that. That's not quite the case, and you will be scrutinising what they do. But what I was thinking about, the other opportunities for the in-house team to actually sort of learn from your more senior, more authoritative approach and gain knowledge and gain experience and authority from that.
Yes, in summary, I think what we are conscious of is that, for example, there is no internal audit manual within the in-house team at the moment. So what we're wanting to do in terms of things like sample sizes, different sort of testing, the use of data analytics, things like that, it will be, yes, a case of trying to upskill those in-house team members, but absolutely it will be about sort of supervision, mentoring, training, developing those two members of staff whilst we're delivering those audits. So absolutely.
Any other comments or questions? Did you have anything? Yeah, Councillor Gray.
Sorry, Chair, you'd be disappointed if I didn't have a question. So probably just 2 or 3 things, Daniel, if I may. I'm trying to work out the link between 1 and 2. So 2 seems to be a list of things that have been done in the past, might be done in the future, or on the list of things to do in the future. I think the update is missing the updates to One Leisure, Green Bin and KFC that you've just done. So it'd be nice to see those added on there, because I couldn't follow those. There weren't enough limiteds, I'm afraid, appearing on there for me to spot that. We are in the dark. Well, I don't think we're in the dark now. So can you explain to me why some of the things that are on one are on two, and some of the things that are on one are not on two, and then we'll move from there, if I may, Chair.
Of course. Yes, thank you, Councillor. Now, it was actually a timing issue in terms of at the time we prepared the strategy document and explicitly section 2 of that. So if you look, for example, at the top of page 15 there, we do have the green bin implementation review. It's just got a tick in because at the time that we prepared this document, we hadn't quite finalised that report and the actual assurance opinion. But it's absolutely a valid observation. So we should be updating this as all 24-25 reviews get finalised and incorporating, you're quite right, things like the 3 limited assurance and the reasonable assurance reviews. So in terms of what we're saying in terms of sort of section 2, the first 3 columns in section 2 in terms of the financial years, that is just a reflection of what has actually happened in terms of internal audit coverage. So, for example, let's halfway down page 63 or page 13 of my pack. So, fuel usage and payments, that audit happened in 22-3, and it was an adequate assurance opinion that was provided. What we're then suggesting is, well, that's got a tick, and that will be subject to coverage in 26-27 in terms of the next time that will be looked at. So what I've tried to do in section 2 is say, for the last 3 financial years, including this financial year, that's what we've established from a review of previous plans and what's actually occurred. The 25-6 column, there should be a direct correlation between a tick in 25-6 and everything that's incorporated in section 1.1. So, for example, data quality and performance management, that's got a tick in. We should, I'm sorry, I'm testing the methodology here. We should see an audit on data quality and performance management. So that is the read across. Yeah, so there is 3/4 of the way down page 58, we've got that audit on data quality and performance management. That's going to be delivered in quarter 2, reported through to the committee in quarter 3. So everything that's got a tick in section 2, we are saying is proposed in the 25-6 internal audit plan, and we provide more details on that particular review in terms of a sort of 2 or 3 sentences in section 1.1.
So then just a reflection from me, really, and just would be keen to know your resourcing, because my reflection at looking at this is it looks great, absolutely great. I mean, it's broad, it encompasses all areas of the council, it's a lovely sweep across the activities that we do. Nobody's going to feel victimised that you're spending all year with them and not anybody else. So it would give us as a committee real comfort, I think, in terms of getting into those areas. I just question, I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, you're talking about doing 5 or 6 of these a quarter. How are you going to do that? Because, I mean, that is no mean task, and some of those areas are relatively straightforward and some of them are not straightforward, as you know. So what confidence can you give us that, you know, you're going to deliver on the plan that's in front of us, and that we're not just kind of signing off something that looks really good, but actually at the end you're not going to be able to do it? And I think probably if you just sort of leading into that, you've clearly got some work on 24, 25 that you're finishing off, and the new municipal year effectively starts, and the new calendar year starts next week. So, you know, how does the overlap between the years also affect what you've got down here? So, very positive, but like to hear about the resourcing.
don't want to be overconfident, but what I would genuinely say is, I mean, I've been at RSM now for 18 years, and I've never failed to deliver an internal audit plan for any client. So in terms of a track record, I've got a successful track record of ensuring that we will deliver a plan of work. I think I mentioned at the last meeting, but perhaps just worth reiterating. So just myself, within my team, I've got anywhere between sort of 40, 45 internal auditors that work across the east of England. We've got 220 internal auditors nationally. Those are sort of core internal audit staff. Alongside that, we've got teams of people like, for example, environmental specialists or IT auditors, etc., etc. So I can draft in. So, for example, the IT audit work will be delivered by that specialist team. So certainly, in terms of those audits that are allocated in the marker there in terms of RSM, I'm confident that we've got the resource. Absolutely, I've mentioned some of the sort of arrangements that we're going to put in place to ensure that we scope the work, that we train the in-house team up on that, but also that we oversee all of the in-house team work. So I've looked at all of the number of days that they're within the business. I think any sort of training requirements, annual leave, and so on. So I'm sort of satisfied that we've got an appropriate allocation there. I think you do raise a really important point that there has not probably for the last 2 financial years been all areas of the council that have been in receipt of internal audits, and so I do think there is an important exercise. I mentioned we were going to go and speak to the heads of service group, and I think that's really important to actually explain that actually an internal audit, I know a lot of people don't sometimes think this, but an internal audit that is actually there to help a head of service provide assurance back to them that the controls that they think are in place, they believe that have been put in place, are actually A, in place, B, have been well designed, and C, are being followed. So there's a little bit of a sort of a heart and minds. Don't get me wrong, I will maintain independence, and if I see things aren't in play or aren't well designed, then that will come through. But it is about us working with management to agree audits, add value, improve processes, but ultimately remain independent and report through to Section 151 and this committee if we identify weaknesses. So hopefully some reassurance.
Suzanne, do you just want to come in there, or did you want to respond to that first?
Well, I was just going to pass the baton to Suzanne. So firstly, thank you for that answer, very reassuring. And secondly, Suzanne, could you just outline to us, Daniel's referred to the in-house team. Could you just kind of update us as to the sort of strengths of the in-house team as we have it today?
I'll answer that, and then perhaps I'll add something in terms of corporate leadership team's desire around this audit plan as well. We have 2 members of staff. One is full-time, one is more part-time, and they're both working strongly with the team. Given that there are employees and at the moment their line of sight is to myself, I do touch base with them, and they are excited to be working on a different range of things, and one of them is continuing to progress with her apprenticeship. So I believe we are offering them support, guidance, and they do feel that they're valued, and so they are contributing to the plan. So hopefully that gives you some assurance on behalf of those. I think when I introduced it, perhaps I didn't articulate it as strongly as I might have done. There's very clear leadership from the corporate leadership team that we do want this level of engagement with audit, and very much it was at the last meeting that CLT said to Dan and Alistair, who's working with him, it would be good to go out and actually talk to the heads of service about this and the approach and what it looks like. Very much seeing it as part of our preparations for local government review as well, the reorganisation as well. So we've had a good look inside the engine and looked at things we need to do, recognising, that will be a commitment on our behalf. We might not like what we see when the bonnet gets lifted. However, we do think it's a really important thing to do. Clearly, as I mentioned earlier, we do meet once a month and focus particularly on governance issues, minuted meeting, to which Dan and Craig, who's been leading on the risk side, come along and make sure that they're challenging us and supporting us. And clearly, if there becomes a stress in terms of resources, that's a conversation we would have at that level and then bring it back here. But we haven't committed ourselves to this, and knowing that it will take some, different departmental inputs as well. So it has been developed in that vein, not just imposed.
Okay, any other comments? Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, Suzanne, I think last time we, at one of these meetings, I think we had more than just 1.5 members on the audit team. Is that right? Or has it decreased recently?
I think I reported at one of the early meetings, we had 2.5. One of them moved on to, she had relocated in the country, so she had moved on. But because we were now engaging with RSM, we take the decision not to fill that post at the current point in time. So that happened, I can't remember, back end of last year when she'd physically, geographically moved. So we haven't recruited to replace her.
Is there any retention? Is there any intentions to recruit anymore, or are you just going with the RSM?
For the short term and moving into 25-26, we're looking to use the hybrid co-sourced approach. And what we were planning to look at is, once we see more about what the shape of local government reorganisation might look like later in this calendar year, then reflect in terms of where do the resources sit, in terms of what that shape might look like, and then make a conscious decision, rather than, it's a very difficult place to recruit at the moment, as we've identified before, but equally not necessarily wanting to bring someone in who suddenly in 2 years' time might go somewhere else. So we thought we would take a pause, work with RSM, where, as Dan's articulated, there are some wider resources at disposal, and then make a judgment when we later know what shapes look like in future.
Yes.
Yeah, this is for Dan, really. So I've got two things to clarify. So first of all, the health and safety. I was looking at the forward programme, and it's only to be audited once in every 4 years, or once. We've got a 4-year plan there, and it's only going to be looked at once. Is health and safety? I do think it's a lot more important than just once every 4 years. So is there a reason why that's like that? And the second thing is, throughout the audit charter and also the report that we went through earlier, which should have been later, you refer to reporting to the board. Can you clarify who you mean by the board? Because is it the senior leadership team? Is it the cabinet? Is it who is the board?
So in relation to health and safety, I mean, I think the first point that I would make, that I perhaps did make right at the end of my presentation, was just that the plan absolutely should remain flexible. So if it was determined that actually health and safety should be subject to audit, for argument's sake, every other year, then that is very much an option available to us. We've also seen this evening that there are other, so for example, the One Leisure review did look at elements of health and safety. So it may not have health and safety directly in the title of the audit, but there may well be elements of coverage within some of these audits that look at health and safety arrangements. So for example, the current hybrid working review is considering elements of health and safety as part of that. It just doesn't state health and safety within the title. And there will also be follow-up coverage. So if, for example, we've delivered a health and safety audit in 24/5, that will be subject, those actions will be subject to coverage, not necessarily a full re-audit, but there will be the exceptions and the areas where actions have been agreed that will also be subject to coverage in a financial year. So it's perhaps not as stark as section 2 of my report might indicate, that health and safety is only being looked at every 4 years. I think that the final point I would just make on that, if, for example, health and safety on the corporate risk register started turning red, that would be an indicator for either in-year need to look at that, or it would certainly go on next year's programme, or be very much heavily discussed as, well, why shouldn't that be on next year's programme if, for example, that risk had turned red. In terms of who the sort of reference to the board, I've obviously got various stakeholders that I will report through to, so this committee being one of them, Section 151 officer being another. The standards also point to the Chief Executive Officer as well, and having a sort of direct line of sight and communication. And I feel that I've very much been encouraged by Michelle to sort of have that line of sight in the last 2 months that I've been working. I've got regular monthly meetings in with the Section 151 officer, and they're also about to be put in also with the monitoring officer. I believe an appointment's been made, so we're in the process of rearranging those. So there are various stakeholders that we report through to. Ultimately, my year-end opinion comes to all of those stakeholders.
Sorry, so through you, Chair. So then, should it not specifically say the board? Because to define what the board is it to key members maybe, or to the senior leadership team, etc.
Sorry, I'll need to double check. I've got a feeling that the charter does go into detail in terms of what we mean by the board. But if I may, I'll take that away as an action, that if there needs to be some further clarity, I think the charter is the place for me to update and amend that.
Because yes, it does say that you have access to other members, but like for instance, mandate authority have full and free access to the board. So it should be maybe to all key members, because it should be free access to everywhere, really.
I think we'll get the clarity on that, and that will hopefully make that a bit easier. Any other comments or questions before we move on to the recommendation? Okay, so what I'm looking for then is a show of hands, just to be able to accept the internal audit plan for 25-26. So can I have a show of hands that everyone is in agreement to accept? Yep, and that's everybody. Thank you very much. Moving on to... Sorry, did you say?
No, sorry, I was trying to throw it.
Just checking. Item 8, internal audit actions. This is an update report. So once again, Suzanne will present.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is the internal audit actions that were in play before the reports that have just been finalised. So this is the first time I've written this report for you. I need to apologise, my word skills deserted me because all the paragraphs start with number 1. So I apologise for that. Clearly, I know where I need to go and take some training from. So apologies for that. Notwithstanding that, the content, hopefully. So what I've set out for you, first of all, is the analysis of the open actions against each of the named audits, whether they're late or on track, and the total being 26 as at the time I wrote this. One of them being relating to vehicle maintenance processes, was originally dated for March. The officer concerned, when I followed up with that one, has asked to redate that for completion by 2025, and I've set out in the paragraph numbered 1.4 that in fact some initial remediation was done as to the issue that was raised there, which was access to training records not being available on the day. So a minimum of 2 officers can now do that, and they're looking to migrate that across to SharePoint, which will allow more access for managers, but they just simply haven't completed it, so they're being honest there. So asking for a redate, recommending a redate of June 2025. So the second table summarises the remainder of the actions under On Track, which shows where they sit, the months that they're due, and those are being seen in detail by corporate leadership team. And I think we've heard the points about can we do more about indicating to whom each of the actions belong, and some of those. And I will work with Dan and the team to see how we can incorporate that into either of those reports. So what I intend to do is, on behalf of leadership team, is to show you each of the open actions, whether they're later on track, for the ones forward dated, which months they arise in, against which of the internal audits, and to give you an explanation for any that are being redated because of whatever the circumstances are. So happy to take comments, questions, and I have noted the earlier comments. So this is what my intention is to bring to committee. This feels a full report on what you should be seeing.
Councillor Hodgson-Jones.
Yes, sorry, Suzanne, I'm being picky here, but if you look at the table in 1.2, the grand total in the right-hand column does not tally with the actual numbers above it. By my reckoning, 10 plus 7 plus 3 is 20, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ones gives you 25, not 26.
Green being implementation is the difference.
Pardon?
The green being implementation. Overall.
Yeah, it's 24 and 25.
That's a forward looking, isn't it?
I think I may have taken one out and then not changed the total. So apologies for that. I have no other confession other than I was late writing them. It was a whole raft of things. So I do know that there were 25 and 26, and then when I revisited them just before the papers were due for publication, one of them had been completed, or it was a forward one. So I apologise for that. So I'm completely inadequate. So I will get that right for next time.
I didn't say that.
I felt it.
Is it the green bin one, isn't it?
No. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So we'll get those amended. Councillor Gray.
Well, firstly, Section 151 officer, you'll be delighted to know that we didn't employ you for your word skills, but your number skills. So
I failed on both then.
word skills are added bonus. Yeah, I mean, you've touched on one of the things that I was going to say, which is point 9 of this, background papers at none. You know, because clearly one of the things that I think we should be laying in front of ourselves here is what are the open actions and how, you know, where are they up to? So they clearly are background papers. And that's the question that I want to ask, is the link between Dan earlier on was basically saying he's going to give us some assurance that he's going to circle back round to make sure that this stuff is happening. So there's clearly going to be a bit of an overlap over your management spreadsheet, for want of a better word, that's looking at all of these open actions and are they being done, and a report that Daniel's going to then bring back into the at some point. There's going to be some overlap there. So I think in terms of future reporting, I'd be interested to know whether or not we can jump off providing word tables on here and actually have a background paper that's perhaps, you know, partly ties the two together. I accept that, you know, this is really your report on how you think you're doing against them rather than Dan's marking your homework, but some background papers would be appreciated by those of us who like to climb into the detail.
I take your point on background papers. I think the number 9 there is about papers that have previously been to committee, where we should link those in line with whatever the rules are. However, sorry? Yeah, so that's the definition of background papers in that sense. In terms of more information, in terms of an appendix, I'm happy to take that away. I'm still learning the system in terms of 4Action, also trying to work with yourselves in terms of what you would like. So all comments welcome, and I'll see the level of detail, and we do use the system. I literally am learning it, but what I will say is together with the in-house team, because we're not as skillful on the system as obviously colleagues who wrote it, we do have a training day planned for late in April so that we can get better at it and provide you with even more information. So I know what you're saying, and we will try and do our best and recognise that each of those reports might be done at a slightly different timescale, but I can talk to Dan and the team about how we can better do that.
Councillor Hodgson-Jones.
Just to say that, Suzanne, for your consolation, if you like, these are Word tables, and the difference between Word and Excel is that when you delete a line, Word does not automatically recalculate the total.
Councillor Hodgson-Jones, I'll share my secret with you later.
Okay, so we are just to comment and note the current position regarding the actions that have arisen from the internal audit report. So if we're in agreement with that, we can then move forward to item 9, the Corporate Governance Committee Progress Report, and Habs will take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. You have the progress report before you. It's been updated since the last meeting. If I can draw your attention to action taken column. I'm proposing the second one is closed now that we've received an update on where the programme manager is due to join us. Happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions or comments? Councillor Gray.
I don't, but because we, for very good reasons, don't have any other business in here. I am going to say that I like all. It's been, I think, Chair, it's been a really, really useful meeting this evening. I'm very, very pleased with, what I've heard, the spirit with which people are engaging with things, notwithstanding the past. I think one of the reflections that I have, and I expect SLT have, is that, we're not going to kind of cross any of this off by just sheer effort from Michelle and Suzanne. It's got to permeate across the organisation. And Dan, I think, made the point, didn't he, that about getting in front of heads of and managers, because I think they've got to kind of really own this for this to be a success. They've got to see that when the teams go in there, that is actually for their benefit. There's good that's going to come out of it. They're going to be better people at the end of that. Not, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm got internal audit with me for a week. Just how do I get them out of here fast enough? So I think, it's great that we all seem to be drawing around alignment here at this level, at the governance level and at the SLT level. But the real action, as we know, takes place with the people who are actually doing the doing.
Of course, yeah.
What I will say to that is that, as well as asking Dan specifically to talk to heads of service and managers about the work of audit and how that's going to be carried forward. We have also kicked them off on a management programme, and some of those topics are covered within the modules that are being covered. So I think we're trying to tackle it in two different ways, and I completely agree with you. We can only lead. We actually need to help others to follow as well. And so we have started that work already as part of the manager training. So hopefully it'll work from both ends as well. So hopefully that gives you some assurance that Michelle and the senior leadership team are absolutely committed to embedding this in the organisation.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to draw the meeting to a close. I just want to say thank you, Suzanne, Sharon, Habs, Dan, and also to Claire for being with us this evening. Thank you, councillors, for your contributions. And with that, I will draw the meeting to a close. Have a good evening.